Welcome back to another episode of I Own a Business. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Vargo, and today's guest is Cindy Braden, who is Vice President of Sales at OneSpot. So, welcome, Cindy, and also tell us, for those who don't know, what is OneSpot? Tell us about it.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here. OneSpot is new software. We just released it last year, so you may not have heard of it, but hopefully, if people have, or at least will soon. Well, on the podcast they will. But it's software designed specifically for practices that do their billing in-house. So in-house revenue cycle management teams. It really focuses on making sure a practice gets paid, managing the aging, submitting clean claims. It's designed just to help make sure that the revenue that you are billing out actually comes in and hits your bank.
I ask because I've heard of it. I know what you guys do, and I thought it would be a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. So, Cindy, you have a pretty deep background in technology, and we're going to weave that into the discussion today, where we'll focus on the often overlooked cracks in the billing process and explore why so much revenue slips through the cracks and what we can do to fix it. And I think we've both seen situations where offices focus on acquiring new patients, adding new services, but they're leaving money on the table with the patients that we already have. And I'm curious your thoughts on that. Is that something that you would agree with in your interactions with offices?
Yeah, so I have been working in the eye care space for just about 26 years now. So I've had a lot of times in practices, a lot of time talking to practices, and now obviously focused on revenue. But I've also always been responsible for revenue with the companies that I work for. So to say that I'm passionate about revenue or that I've been in a lot of these conversations is probably an understatement. And I know, there's a couple of options that I see kicked around often when people are talking about revenue, right? You can raise your prices. Just saw there's some companies raising prices right now. And that's kind of a topic like if we raise prices, do we lose patients? You can add additional revenue stream, new technology that you can put in, or different treatments, different products. I see a lot of dry eye labs, which I'm a dry eye patient. So I appreciate those conversations. But then, I think kind of very, very top line is, are you collecting the money that you're already billing? Because it's great if you're adding these new revenue paths, but you may not need to add as much, or you may not need to raise prices if you're actually collecting the revenue that's owed. Obviously, the payers have contracted discounts and pricing, but we're just talking things that you bill out that you should get paid, that there's no reason for you not to get paid, but maybe just slips through the cracks because somebody doesn't get an opportunity to collect that payment. There's about 100 things that could go wrong from the time that a patient books the appointment until that money hits your bank, which it's tough, right? That's tough for your practice. It's tough for your team. But identifying if there's consistently a hitch somewhere in that system could mean that you're not going to get paid. So I think that's one of the most important things to do before you add additional money, is to make sure that you're not adding a ton at the top and then just having things leak out, through the process.
You used the word hitch, and you said there's hundreds of things that could go wrong. So probably don't have time to cover hundreds. What are the biggest hitches? What's that 80/20? What are the 20% of the things that drive 80% of the mistakes that you see in practices?
Yeah, it is very practice specific. One of the things I will say is, if you talk to the team, they typically know. They typically know, right? People are aware of where they fall short. And sometimes I think the frustration is they don't know how to fix it, or maybe they feel like they don't have time to fix it. But there's kind of the very front end of, I have billers tell me this all the time, and front desk staff. Patients are notorious for not knowing their own information accurately, right? So if you get patients' payer information wrong, if they don't know their legal name, you're trying to pull reimburse or the eligibility and benefits. If that's not accurate, either somebody has to figure it out on the back end, or you don't get paid, right? So there's kind of that front end process stuff. And then there's, once the claim is introduced, to get submitted, to get paid, is the information accurate? Usually somebody, we call that scrubbing, somebody's looking at the claims to say, hey, if I don't have the accurate information on here, it's going to get rejected, not denied because of the payer, but rejected because the information isn't complete. And then there is the insurance uh, denials. They're saying, hey, you didn't get, this is not the right patient. We don't have the right plan for this patient. You did something that can't be billed for this patient. So those are kind of the main three, steps, I think. Getting the information up front, making sure the claim itself and the coding is accurate to go to get paid, and then whether or not that patient actually qualified for the reimbursement that your practice is trying to get.
I'm sure you've seen what I'm going to mention, which is a lack of internal knowledge when it comes to billing. So a lot of offices, especially smaller offices, might have one person who understands it well enough, and a lot of other people who don't understand it at all, including the doctor. So for an office like that, what would you suggest as the best approach to avoid these hitches? Because it seems like there would need to be some oversight over one individual. That's a lot of responsibility for one person to have in an office without anyone else really understanding that revenue cycle management side. So is it training a secondary person? Is it outsourcing it? I know situations vary, but just let's place ourselves into let's just say a smaller office with one person who is doing all the billing and nobody else really understands what's going on. How would you approach that office?
Yeah, it's interesting. We just conducted a survey because we find that there's a lot of different scenarios. And when you talk to people, the process in a practice is very different, and then the knowledge, uh, especially with practice owners. I just talked to a doctor the other day who has one similar to situation of what you just said. He has one biller, new person in the practice, really excited. It's a her. The doctor is really excited about her, and he wants to protect her. I was super impressed with the doctor because he said on the call, when if I get caught up or I'm slow, I will log in and I'll try to help, look at the aging and see if there's something wrong. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's not a lot of doctors that, have the ability to do this. So I was really impressed that this doctor has the belief of, if I'm going to ask somebody to do it, I need to know how to do it myself so that I can, when they bring a problem to me, I know how to solve it. So I think that's just super important that the doctors, and I know everybody's so busy, and this is not a guilt, like if you're not doing this, shame on you, because there's so many things that have to be done. But I do think having somebody else that can say in the practice, that can oversee it with comprehensive knowledge so that you can say, hey, I can anticipate these problems and I can help my biller with those problems before they necessarily, hopefully they are comfortable bringing things to you, but somebody that has the ability to have that one-on-one conversation with them and be knowledgeable, I think is important. The other thing I would say is it's a huge risk to have one person in the practice. I mean, this is probably why you asked the question. It's a huge risk. The other half of my company that I work for does outsourced billing, and I cannot tell you how many times we get calls because the biller left. Oftentimes, it's health issues, spouses get relocated, and it's something that catches the practice off guard, and their cash flow stops because there's nobody else that knows how to dive in. And so they'll call the other side of our company, the outsourcing rev cycle partners, in a pinch because, they don't know even how to jump in. So the idea of having somebody else in the practice that can help, having documentation. I've sat in on quite a few billing and coding classes now because I really like to know what billers are encountering, and having a manual that has all that information is really important. I personally like physical things that I can touch, but that's probably not the easiest way to update and keep things up to date. So some sort of an online location where you can store all of your usernames, all of your logins, the specific rules by pair. It's a lot tougher if somebody's not touching it as you go, but at least if that knowledge is captured somewhere in the practice so that if the biller leaves, somebody does have access to it. Our software, OneSpot, that's why it got the name OneSpot, is we do have a repository of all that information so that if somebody needed to step in or if the doctor wants to see what's going on, they can do it as well. But I highlight having one person with all of that knowledge is really, really risky in your practice. So if you don't have somebody on the leadership team that can step in to keep their eye on it, please make sure that you have some sort of a repository, some sort of a binder, or some sort of online spot where at least somebody would have an idea to jump in should you lose that person.
I completely agree, and I've seen that happen in offices. The dangers of having one person have all the oversight over the building without others really understanding what's going on. For one thing, it leaves them without the support that they need. It's a tough role and it's an evolving role. Billing codes and regulations change, so they're going to need support in that role. And when they're the only one who understands it, they don't really have that support. But I've also seen a darker side of that role where people who have that power can become somewhat territorial. And you're right, if they leave, you're in trouble. Also, they can become somewhat territorial where they don't want other people to know what's going on. And that really raises a red flag.
This has been, I'm going to be as neutral. You're going to be like, she's so political. But this has been a really interesting thing for me because I spend almost half of my time talking to billers, the other half of my time talking to practice leadership, right? And when you talk to a biller, they're like, well, nobody taught me how to do this. I figured this all out. A lot of them feel like it is their knowledge, it's their proprietary information because not a lot of practices are set up to train them, or like you said, they don't have somebody else that they can rely on. So it is interesting because a lot of them feel like it is their proprietary knowledge that, the systems that they put in place. Now, obviously, when you're working for a practice, it's the practice that really owns the information. But the more time I spend talking to billers, I do understand how they feel a bit like they're on an island and they had to figure it all out on themselves. So, I can understand why sometimes they get a little territorial with it because there's not a lot of practices do a wonderful job with this, but there's not always great resources for them, and they do have to figure a lot of it out on their own. So they tend to feel a little bit like, well, this is my information because I did it on my own, which is risky, but
We've established that there's a lot of risk going into this on the front end, and a lot of problems can come from that, which often ends up in bad outcomes on the other side. Can we transition to accounts receivable, right? That's the unfortunate outcome a lot of times when we don't have a good internal or revenue cycle management process. And accounts receivable is it's a constant struggle for a lot of practices. What strategies have you seen work best to bring those numbers down? Is it a process issue? Is it staffing? Is it technology? Is it all of the above?
yeah, I think it is all of the above. Probably the number one thing that I've seen. I mean, I've probably talked to, gosh, maybe 250, 300 practices in the last year or so as we're trying to help out with OneSpot and get things sorted out. And it's almost always the biller or the people responsible for billing. It's one of the parts of the survey we filled out was like, who helps with your revenue cycle process management? And it was a multi-select. And it's like front desk, optician, like everybody in the practice, which is true, right? Like everybody has to help with it. But typically, the number one thing that I see is just lack of time or focus. Very often, a lot of these practices, there is not a dedicated biller. And if there is a dedicated biller, I've only had one dedicated biller tell me that even though they are dedicated billers, they don't just do billing. They fill in when they know how to run the OCT and they know how to do the photos. And when somebody goes out for lunch on the front desk, they're covering the front desk. So I think that the easiest thing maybe to do would be to, well, I say easy, and it's probably tongue in cheek, but to really make sure that the practice understands the importance of the process, protecting the biller's time. If somebody else is responsible for gathering that information up front, make sure that they don't kind of kick the can down the road and say, well, I didn't get it all. Since I run sales and marketing teams, I would probably incentivize the whole team, like tie them into the success of your aging, because if you're paying attention to your aging, you have the ability to see when things are going astray. And then it's usually pretty easy to figure out, what hitch needs to be tightened up a little bit. So really, I think just making it a priority for the practice, making sure you protect that biller. And I know they have to fill in. I mean, that's probably one of the most fun things about working in an optometry practice is the fact that you get to do a little bit of everything, but you do have to protect their time because if the practice isn't getting paid, nobody's getting paid. You're not able to buy new technology. And it's obviously going to have a huge impact.
Cindy, you seem to be making a strong case for outsourcing billing. Maybe not even intentionally. And I know you're somewhat biased because this is your world, but I'm going to give you permission to be biased here and just candidly, should offices be doing billing in-house or should they just be outsourcing? And maybe part B of that question is give me the scenario where you would tell an office, you know what, you don't really need us. You're doing a great job with what you got. And I'm going to assume that that's not the majority. But do you feel like there's too many offices out there that are trying to do this themselves when they would be much better off, both operationally and financially, just to outsource it and take those team members and focus on the things that drive growth within the practice, including better patient care?
Yeah, so it's such a great question. And this is probably the very first question I get in almost every conversation I have, because the company that I work for, we have the software, people have their in-house billers, and then we have the outsourced services. And as I said, when we had people fill out that survey, it's almost everybody, almost all practices have an all hands on deck approach to their revenue cycle management. So I guess I would say if you have it's more expensive probably to outsource, but you get the expertise and the sole focus of, an expert biller that's only responsible for making sure that you get paid. I think most of the billing companies, I know for us, we get paid a percentage of what we collect. So we are very, very highly incentivized to make sure that money is getting collected. Now, on the other side, I can tell you, even with OneSpot, we have two practices that their billers were doing so well that they didn't even think that they needed additional software to help support their billers because they were really crushing it. So most of the practices I talk to come to me because they are struggling with revenue cycle management at some stage. So it makes sense that we're, having the conversation, should you outsource or should you keep it in-house? But there are quite a few practices out there that, I had somebody say to me, my best employee is my biller. Like they don't even want me to talk to her because they think I'm going to like take him or her away from their practice. I'm like, we're not going to take, your biller away. So if you have the right staff, the doctor that I brought up earlier, that when he has a moment, he logs in and works on aging to help his biller out. He was so excited because she's a detective. She takes ownership, takes pride in chasing the money, and getting paid. He's like, she gives me these examples of these stories of this money that she didn't think she could get, and then she gets paid. So if you have the right person and you support them with the right tools, I think some of the most successful practices have in-house teams. If you are struggling with your team and everybody already feels like they can't do enough, I don't know why people wouldn't consider doing outsourcing. I've talked to practice managers that are overseeing the entire practice that say, nobody's going to be mad at me. My aging is out of control, but nobody's mad because everybody knows I don't have time. That to me just seems like a really obvious situation where you would say, let's get them some help because they're probably not doing a great job overseeing the practice. And we know they're not doing a great job with their aging.
Yeah, I think there are probably those obvious situations. But as practices that continually struggle with adequate staffing and losing staff, I think you've got to look at how do we continue to provide the most value with potentially fewer staff, and what do we outsource, what do we let go of? So I think it's an obvious area. And you described some practices that probably don't need much help. They're killing it with the billing. They've got the right 1-2 person, maybe a backup. The doctor's keeping an eye on what's going on. but that doesn't describe a lot of the practices that I talk to as well. And again, these days, I think we've got to look at what are our priorities. And if the priority is customer service, patient care, then what are the areas of our practice that we should consider, at least consider and explore the idea of outsourcing. And I can't stress enough, I think I just want to sort of reiterate something I think we've talked about is the communication between the doctor and the biller. And even if you're a doctor and you say, well, I don't understand all the billing and I'm busy and I don't even necessarily want to understand it. I've just seen too many situations where successful, smart doctors have come to us with accounts receivable through the roof and had no idea. This was going on for 6 months, a year. Just nobody had checked it. So even if you don't understand the billing at a highly competent level, have ongoing and consistent communications with your billers and have them tell you what they're doing and how they're checking things. You can always validate that. You can actually learn from them, but don't let communication or lack of communication be the reason that you have this oh crap moment 12 months out, 18 months out, when you realize it's this ship is sailed pretty far out to sea and it's going to be hard to bring back in at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's timely filing deadlines. I talked to a doctor that's actually going to do some outsource, going to use OneSpot to help his in-house team, but is going to outsource. So I think eligibility and verification. So offloading some of it, but leaving the in-house team. And I was talking to the doctor, and he has two billers. One's in the practice, and one is like a contracted biller. And he said, for the last, I want to say 5 months, he wasn't getting paid on like three of his medical payers, and nobody told him. He was terribly frustrated. And so we were looking up the timely filings, and at least one of them had a 6-month timely filing deadline. So he had like 30 days to try to collect from, he's like, it's been since December that I haven't gotten paid on any of these. So he's making some changes with his team and what's going on. But, if somebody hadn't brought that to him, it would have gone, all of them would have gone past timely filing, and there, you could appeal it, but it all of a sudden becomes really, really hard to get paid for that reimbursement that is money that's owed you. So yeah, it's a great point.
Assuming you are doing this in-house, what would you consider the top KPIs to track in terms of billing?
Yeah, so this was another question that we had on the survey, which was super interesting just to see who's tracking what. And it was almost like equal across the board. Everybody's tracking a little bit of something. I do think as long as you're tracking something and you're consistent so that you see if there's anomaly, that's a great start, right? I think probably the easiest thing to track in most of the practice management systems, because you can run by date of service and then see what's outstanding, is a simple number of anything that's under 60 days should be 80% or more of your aging. A claim takes typically, for all healthcare, it's 16 to 33 days to get paid. Eye care specific is usually between like 21 and 28 days. So if something is over 60 days old in your aging, something went wrong. That's not going to show up on an EOB at this point. Something went wrong and it needs to be sorted through, resubmitted, checked, cleaned up, whatever needs to be done. So 80% of your aging should be less than 60 days old. As long as you're tracking that, then you can tell. I will also say most of the companies that import into our software, they have way more than 20% of their aging over 60 days old, which is why they come in to help get it cleaned up. The other thing that I would say would be wonderful, because the probably the second question I get is, can you track write-offs that are being written off that shouldn't be written off, right? So if you're doing your net collections ratio, so if you're tracking fee schedules and you know what you're billing out, what you should be collecting compared to what you are collecting, that's a little trickier, I think. But if you can do those two things, you're really going to see if there is some sort of hitch in the system, because you've got those starting numbers, where you can try to whittle things down. We have practices that have 5% of their aging over 60 days now. Once they get it, I mean, it's fantastic. Even practices that only had 12% initially, that come in, they put the software in so that they can really see what's going on, can get it down to like 7%, which is you can always do better, right? But if you have a starting point, then you know what you're tracking and when you're making an improvement. And if that aging flies off the handle, probably there's something wrong. There could be a credentialing issue. So you have to have some sort of starting point, I guess I would say. So 80% less than 60 days. Um, and then if you can track that net collections so that you can start to realize if things are getting written off just because they got missed versus things that are just contracted pricing that you have with the payers.
Cindy, before we jumped on, we were talking about an area that's become sort of a hot topic in everything really, but in eye care as well. And you have some background working with this technology, artificial intelligence. I'm curious where you see that starting to implement itself in this area of billing and revenue cycle management, because it seems like it's primely positioned to make quite a difference and be quite a supportive tool in this area.
Yeah, so this is, the question of where can things go? Where can the industry be headed? I geek out on artificial intelligence. Like you said, you and I were kind of spent some time even before we jumped on the podcast talking about it. And the idea that when you have, um, you know, data that you can plug in of like here's the information, here's what's supposed to happen, now identify any outliers or ways that we can rectify it. From what I've seen, we don't have it in like coding. I think part of that is another thing that you brought up earlier, how many payers there are and by state and the rules, and they change them so much. The things that these billers have to keep track of is a little bit insane. So I think as we get more data, as we're able to track things by payer, all the different rules, I feel like it is so prime for artificial intelligence to try to be helping not only with the coding and making sure that things are done accurately, but then also in trying to help identify hang-ups in submitting the claims and making sure they get paid. One of the things, maybe you can help me with this, it is always interesting to me when I talk to the billers, they'll say, I have two claims, should be the same. I submit them, one gets paid and one doesn't, right? Like, so I think that makes it a little trickier. Artificial intelligence does much better in black and white situations, right? Like here's the data, here's the path, here's the expected outcomes. And it's interesting to me because it seems like sometimes payers don't follow the rule of expected outcomes, but at some point, I gotta think that artificial intelligence is going to make a big impact in this. I also think things like, cutting down the amount of time it takes to track information down. I gotta think it's going to be very supportive for billers and that, when something is wrong, they're on their own, like we said earlier, to try to figure out why. So just leaning on artificial intelligence. Obviously, there's human ways, there are groups, like there's Facebook groups and that they can help each other with it. But I think artificial intelligence can really help them track down some of these answers, what they're trying to sort through as well.
Yeah, and you can use it for various things, understanding that it's not perfect and it sometimes hallucinates, and you want to validate what it tells you, and you certainly want to fact check whenever that's appropriate. But you can even ask AI to give you, to cite its sources, and then that's one way of
Yeah.
making that process easier. But I've sort of discovered, I didn't discover it. What am I talking about? Like I could figure this out. Um, Taking a something like a document, a provider contract, check, make sure you're not doing anything that's HIPAA violation or get
Right.
you in trouble. So, but let me follow through on that line of thinking. You can upload things into ChatGPT or Claude or one of these large language models and ask it questions on huge documents that we didn't have access to before. So I've seen more practices now either figuring that out on their own, where they can just upload something and ask it, am I billing this correctly? Why did this get denied? And those sorts of questions. But I've discovered things too where I've been asked a question on something like the eyeglass law, where I went in, that's a
Oh,
hundred and
right.
some pages long, and I got asked a question on it, and the pre AI time would have involved usually me going in and having to read through this thing to find the answer because that's my job, or think who knows this that I could reach out to it with my contacts. But what I did is I just uploaded that to ChatGPT and asked it the question, and it gave me the exact answer and showed me exactly where it was pulling it from, so I could validate that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of using even just that as a resource for billing is it can be a tremendous help.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you think about all the payers, they have published data out there
Hmm.
with all their rules and the regulations. I do the same thing. I'll ask a question and then I ask it to cite the source and it'll highlight it and then I go and I like read the pages around it, right? For context and that. But yeah, especially I think in billing. And coding, where, some of it is a little bit trial by error. You have to be honest with the information, but sometimes you don't know, there's conflicting, you get conflicting messages from the payers, right? So the ability to have all of these additional resources now where you don't have to read 100 pages to find the paragraph where they talk about that particular thing. And then you have, as you said, the human side of it where the biller themselves are able to say, okay, that tracks with the information I got back from the payer in the EOB on why it was denied. And then the information I was able to source because I didn't have to read 100 pages, and the AI was able to help. But I do think it's gonna go further. Like with our software right now, we have a claim scrubber which we wrote because we have on the other side of the business, we know the things that are getting rejected because payer numbers have to be a certain thing. You have to have modifiers for certain things. So we have those built in from our own human intelligence, the rules that we know are important, right? Because there's not really a great place to pull that data, but there's going to be more and more places where we can get that data from that the artificial intelligence is going to be able to help with for sure. Yeah, it's going to be exciting, I think. I think using a tool applied to hardworking, smart people to make their time more efficient is just going to be a big win for everybody.
Yeah, and the the time savings and efficiency is really incredible. And I think we'll close out there. I think I'm gonna have you back at a different time to just talk about AI because it seemed like this conversation evolved into that anyway. But what I'm using it for myself and what I'm seeing the practices who are using it, they're experiencing quite a significant and impressive level of time savings and efficiency. And at the back end of this, and this is what I wish people understood, is that it's people first and then technology. And every office will say we are focused on providing the best patient experience, the best patient care, but we're busy. And we started with where do things fall through the cracks with billing, but we can land on this. Where do things fall through the cracks on patient care, on the patient experience? And I think you got to look at the aspects of your practice and say, where could we be more efficient? Where could we save time so we could invest more of that time into patient care, into the patient experience? And I think AI is just one tool that could allow you to do that, as well as if you feel that your office is not crushing it on billing and it'd be better if we just got that off our plate. These are just some areas to look at to free up more time to do what doctors do best, to do what an optician does best, to do what your front desk staff does best, which is continuing to provide high touch patient care, especially in this era. What technology is great, but I think the consumer is starting to feel a little left out um, on the human connection side at times.
Yeah, I think the more options a practice considers and always holding patient care at the forefront, the better, right? Like you said, practices, a lot of the practices I talk to have great staff, but have a hard time finding additional great staff out there, right? So trying to figure out how to protect your team, how to protect your patients. And there's just one of the things that I think is most exciting about the overlap of the fields that I work in, which is eye care and technology, is how quickly both evolve. And you can go to a meeting and you're like, I cannot believe the new things that we're learning on the medical side of eye care and the new things that we're learning on technology. So just staying abreast of all of it so that you have those options, you're just going to be arming your team and arming your team to take care of patients better and better.
Well, thanks so much, Cindy. I appreciate your time. and everything you shared, definitely relevant topics in eye care. I think we connected on a lot of different areas that will connect with many of the listeners. Where can people find out more about OneSpot?
So the website is onespotbilling.com. And if anybody's just got any questions about their aging or process, I would love to talk to them and we can help them out on both sides, in-house or outsource.
How would they get in touch with you?
So my email address is just cbraden@onespotbilling.com. And I'm actually happy to share my phone number as well, which you can call pretty much anytime, is 630-697-3102.
Well, thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate your
Thanks
time.
for having us.
Well, thanks to Cindy, and thanks to everyone for listening. We will see you in the next episode.